Traveling alone is fun until things go wrong. These horror stories prove that sometimes it's better to have a travel buddy by your side. In this video, we will be discussing terrifying stories of people who have traveled alone and encountered some spine-chilling experiences. These stories will make you think twice. Once upon a time, I took off on an exciting backpacking adventure to this beautiful place called San Sebastian in Spain. This journey led me to mingle with fellow travelers at my hostel, and we discovered some lovely bars around town together. Late into the night, I found myself alone, seated outdoors at one of these watering holes, relishing the rejuvenating open air. Out of nowhere, a pair of local lads fetched up and began a friendly chat with me. At first, the interaction seemed harmless enough, and I was enjoying our chit-chat. However, things took a strange turn when they repeatedly suggested that I accompany them to a dockside site. I was polite and tried to brush off their insistence in a lighthearted manner, but they wouldn't back down. My command over the Basque language and Spanish might not have been impressive, but drawing from my understanding of French and Latin, I sensed danger. The bits and pieces I caught of their in-between talk gave me a chilling hunch that their intention was to lure me to the docks with ill intentions, possibly even to harm me. Sensing the risk, I tactfully extricated myself from the situation and made my way back to the safe and lively company of my hostel mates in the bar. The experience was deeply unsettling, and I was on edge until we were back, secure in the confines of our hostel. The reassurance of being in familiar company eased my fear and made me feel safe again. Throughout my life, I've ventured solo to many parts of the world, often finding myself as the sole foreigner for miles around. At times, I was the only woman journeying alone, and my distinct complexion made blending into the crowd a complex challenge. I recall a time when I was crossing through a foresty stretch of the Bois de Boulogne in France in the afternoon. I noticed two men strolling on an elevated parallel path. As they reached my level, they suddenly split off. One of them began wandering back, while the other veered towards my direction through the trees. Noticing this, I immediately turned and paced back from my original path, ensuring not to alert them of any fear I might have had. And it was indeed a good decision to make, as I later came to know about a series of unfortunate events that took place in the Bois. There was another time when fear gripped me tightly. It was during a flight to Paris in adverse weather conditions. Darkness enveloped the early morning sky, with clouds masking the typically visible lights of the sprawling greenhouses. The plane, a gigantic Air France Airbus, shook and creaked, dipping left and right due to heavy turbulence. As the turbulence persisted, I couldn't help but reach for the hand of the stranger beside me, who was doing the same. As the plane descended and we finally saw the runway lights, we released our hands, relief washing over us. As the plane landed, the interior lights revealed that nearly all passengers had, in their fear, reached out and held on to someone else, be they a friend, a family member, or a total stranger like mine. After everything settled, my seatmate and I exchanged a glance of mutual understanding and relief, then carried on with our separate lives. That moment stays with me to this day, and I often find myself wishing him well. Once upon a time, in my younger days, I found myself a lone female adventurer in the heart of a wild New Year's Eve party in Cape Town, South Africa. An unforgettable experience was when I was saved by a considerate taxi driver. This act of compassion, which happened over a quarter of a century ago, is still something I hold dear to my heart. You see, the potential for danger was high that night. South Africa, a destination of wonder and diversity, is sadly known for its challenges, including severe poverty and a staggering crime rate. Enthusiastic and full of youthful energy, I looked forward to joining a New Year's Eve beach extravaganza. By this chance, I hooked up with some fellow travelers at my hostel, and we all decided to head to the party using an affordable, communal mini-taxi. On arrival, the scene was quite chaotic. Young locals, energetic and rowdy, were having fun in their own unique way, with shouting, fruit throwing, and black shoe polish marking in the mix. Before we knew it, we too were the targets of this wild celebration. Seeking refuge, we took cover in a nearby restaurant, and whilst enjoying our meal, an egg splattered against the window next to me. This was a real eye-opener. I was uncomfortable and decided it was time to leave. My newfound friends had other plans and decided to stay back, leaving me to venture out on my own. With the mini-taxis out of service due to the drivers joining the party, I had no choice but to walk until I was able to stop a regular taxi. As we journeyed back to my hostel, I noticed the taxi meter spinning at an alarming rate. My spirits hit rock bottom as I realized I hadn't brought enough money to cover the fare. I instructed the driver to pull over as soon as my cash was depleted, but to my surprise, he continued driving and brought me safely all the way back to the hostel. I remember an adventurous weekend I had at some point. I was in the pleasant surroundings of Point Reyes, California, paddling away in my kayak. As the day was gradually swallowed up by the cool darkness of night, I found myself on an isolated strip of beach. I quickly arranged my camping gear, setting up my tent and creating a cozy campfire to keep myself warm. I sat there, soaking up the warmth of the fire and admiring the countless stars that embellished the sky, when suddenly, a curious sound caught my attention. I had been warned beforehand about the presence of elks in the area, particularly as they were in their mating season. With caution, I rotated my head in the direction of the sound, and inadvertently, an ear-splitting scream, one that could be compared to a girl's frightful cry, slipped out of me. There, just a mere foot away, were 6 pairs of crimson eyes piercing through the thick, dark curtain of the night. I beamed my flashlight at the intruders, only to realize they were a bunch of raccoons. Convinced of my safety, I was not overly worried. After all, I had been practicing Taebo and had watched a good number of Buffy episodes. When my spontaneous moves didn't faze them, I decided to resort to a more primitive approach. I picked up a stick and started banging it against a rock in perhaps what could be considered a mad manner. And surprisingly, it worked. But soon enough, they were back, and with their return it became clear to me that these were not the adorable, harmless creatures portrayed in Disney movies. A bright idea dawned on me then. Rushed to the safety of the tent. I made a run for it, and as I was securely tucked away inside, I could hear them dragging something that sounded suspiciously like a dead body. Then came the eerie sounds. Scratch, 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 scratch. They had enveloped the tent and seemed poised to invade. During the ensuing panic, I must have lost consciousness from fear, or shall we say drifted into sleep. Morning couldn't have come any sooner. As I stepped out of my tent, I was welcomed by the sight of my backpack, one that the frenzied creatures had dragged around 100 feet, treating it like a dead body. The cherry on top is that they had feasted on all my power bars, which probably accounted for their tireless energy. Once upon a time, I was a young lady of 22 and decided to embark on a solo adventure in South America. My journey took me to Santiago, Chile, where I found myself stepping off the bus late into the night, around 10 p.m. to be precise. No sooner had my feet hit the ground than a man approached me from the direction of the taxi stand, inquiring if I was in need of a taxi ride. I gave him a nod of affirmation, and off we went towards his taxi, which was parked a considerable distance away, about 5 blocks or so. As we walked through the vast city that was unfamiliar to me, a sense of unease started to creep in. But, shaking off my worries, I reminded myself everything was all right. Before getting in, I made sure to scrutinize the taxi for its usual branding, and then I hopped into the front seat, keeping my bag close to me, as was my custom when taking Ubers in this part of the world. I gave the driver the address of my hostel, and we started an easy conversation in Spanish about breaking the ice during the initial minutes of the ride. After a pause in the conversation, he turned towards me and, in a calm voice, asked, "Are you scared?" Which startled me. I tried to play it cool, chuckling a little and replying, "Haha, no, I'm good, just tired and it's late." He looked at me and noted, "Well, you seemed pretty scared back there when we were walking. You know, there are many wrong types around here. Sometimes they masquerade as taxis. You can never tell who is trustworthy. I've heard tales of women being kidnapped after getting into a wrong taxi. Are you traveling here by yourself?" All this while, we were still in the midst of the city, with darkness enveloping us and the hour late. The chilling realization that not a single soul knew my whereabouts hit me. I had planned to send an update to my family once I reached the hostel. They were under the impression that I was still on the coast. Of course, I didn't share any of that with him and replied that I was always cautious and that my friends were actually expecting me at the hostel. As I spotted a stoplight up ahead, I started formulating a plan to exit the vehicle as soon as it slowed down. That was undoubtedly one of the most frightening moments of my life. Suddenly, I noticed from the corner of my eye the driver reaching under his seat. My mind immediately leaps to gun, he's gonna pull out a gun. But what he actually pulled out was far from my expectations. A religious pamphlet. He then said, "But you know, there's always one thing we can trust, right? The Lord. Do you believe in God?" He spent the rest of the journey trying to persuade me towards religion. Although he turned out to be harmless, at the time that unexpected religious taxi driver gave me a fright I wouldn't forget. Rewind back to the year 1993. I found myself journeying through France when a splendid idea popped into my head. I decided to break away from my companions and embark on a little adventure of my own. A whisper from a fellow traveler about an enchanting island named Ile de Ré, nestled off the French coast, had caught my attention. The description was irresistible, so with a spirit of adventure coursing through my veins, I hopped onto 2 trains and a bus that transported me over a bridge leading straight to the island. As I took in my surroundings, the island's seclusion was strangely reminiscent of Nantucket, as it was 2 decades ago. Back then, only long-standing traditional families would visit, making it a rather exclusive holiday destination. As for accommodation on Ile de Ré, there was just a solitary inn with 20 rooms. It radiated a rustic charm, but to my dismay, it was fully occupied. My mind started racing. Where was I going to crash for the night? To make matters worse, none of the locals conversed in English. Luck finally smiled upon me when I crossed paths with a kind-hearted woman. She knew of someone who could provide me with a room, so she guided me to the place and made a phone call to announce my arrival. The door was opened by an elderly woman, clad in nothing but a brassiere and a voluminous skirt. She was far from welcoming. She curtly stated the cost of the room and firmly declared that no female company was allowed. The house, too, reflected its owner's gruff demeanor. It was old, reeked of a musty odor, and had an eerily strange vibe. Once in my room, I could not shake off the feeling that it resembled more of a prison cell than anything else. It was incredibly cramped, with just a tiny window for ventilation. Who was this woman? Were there more people in the house? No one back home had any clue about my whereabouts. I felt completely isolated. In a desperate attempt to manage my fear, I tried to convince myself that this was all part of the grand adventure. But that didn't seem to work. I could meet my end here, I thought. I was determined to stay alive and get some rest, so I scribbled a note in my best attempt at French and also in English, stating my dire situation and providing a contact number back home. As sleep finally claimed me, I kept glancing at the note, praying it wouldn't be swept away by a breeze. Morning came and I found myself still breathing. The note was exactly where I had left it. I dressed hastily and descended the stairs only to see the old lady still in her unchanging attire. Mustering all politeness, I mumbled a merci, darted out of the house, and headed straight for the bus. I have held on to that note ever since. So, these are just a few of the many stories that highlight the dangers and challenges of traveling alone. But at the same time, let's not forget all the positive experiences and personal growth that comes with solo travel. With that, subscribe to the channel and give this video a thumbs up.